This is
Yeah,
I'm recording. I love what you just said.
yeah, of course, we can repeat it.
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it goes back to how we're socialized, right? All of us growing up listening to fairy tales and hearing these stories about how love is supposed to feel when someone comes on really strong. It's like a green light. When now, from where I'm standing, someone throwing themselves at me that way is completely unacceptable.
Right. Right. I mean, it's kind of been the, couples goals, romance goals, like to have this man come on strong, sweep you off your feet and tell you that you're the love of his life and then whisk you off to marry you and do all this stuff. And it is like such a huge, huge red flag.
Such
And
a red flag.
and the whole piece that I saw, one of the things that really stood out in your film is that piece about the mirroring of like, well, we have our own language and nobody else would understand what we have together. And that dialogue really isolates you and cements this bond with this person. And and it's so subtle but intense. And they're trying so hard to kind of program you. It's like us against the world. And nobody will understand because they know other people are going to try to pull you back to reality.
Mm-hmm. And unless you've been through that before, they're targeting you and specifically forging a trauma bond with you
Mhm.
so that when they start mistreating you, you remember those good times and your brain is constantly in this war with itself because you remember all those good times you had in that trauma bond and that specialness that was sort of thrown at you. But then when you're being mistreated, you're just in complete cognitive dissonance, about what is actually happening to you. And that's the part that makes me the most sad um, because of that love bombing phase, when I was being mistreated, I was almost disassociating from myself and reliving a previous version of myself that was happy just to stay within the mistreatment.
Wow. That is interesting. So you weren't even like, you were intentionally trying not to see it. Is that kind of what you're saying? Or you're like trying to live in the past, live in the good stuff, swim around in it. And
100%.
wow.
You're always hoping that that person that love bombed you, that said you're the only one for me, that this is so special, that basically story you were sold, that you've been given, that you believed, you're always looking to that to justify and explain your present, even though in the present it's like a living hell.
Yeah. Wow. I found a journal that I wrote with my second narcissist and I saw everything. And it's like, I still move forward. I still had a baby, a house, and then another baby. And I mean, I had a plan to even get out. So I get it. Like it's amazing how we can see things and kind of talk ourselves out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true.
So one of the things, and there's so much I can dig into, and when is the film going to be released first?
That's a very good
I don't want to give
question.
anything away. Yeah.
That's a very good question. So we're currently working towards all the major festival deadlines, which are this
Okay.
fall.
Well,
And those festivals, bearing we get in, would occur this winter. However, my plan is to, once the film is complete, which will be early fall, is to start hosting smaller screenings within communities and to work with a social impact producer to get the film out there to smaller communities so we can start having these conversations. Because while I feel this topic is important for the public at large to see, I also believe that it is really necessary within communities of people who this has happened to have more intimate, control groups to be able to discuss it. So,
yeah.
so this fall is hopefully when it'll be complete and we'll
Wow.
start doing like a community rollout plan. Yeah.
Are you going to do a college circuit or high
That's
school?
the hope.
I get so many comments like, why don't they teach this? Like, if I had known this in high school and maybe even younger, um, so many things would have been different for me. Like people who've lost 30, 40, 50 years of their life because they just didn't know. And again, you said it, the Disney thing. I
Mhm.
thought I had, you know.
It's the Disney thing. I mean, so on a relational, intimate relationship perspective, we've been socialized to see someone throwing themselves at us, especially as a woman. But I think it spans across all relationships. We've been seen to see that hot and heavy, strong come on as love, when to me, it's complete chaos now from where I'm standing.
Right.
But also, in terms of society, in our American culture, narcissism is kind of valorized. This super ego person that can do no wrong is kind of put on a pedestal in our culture. And we know like kids would largely benefit from this because a lot of people grow up in homes with a narcissistic parent or a sociopathic parent.
Mm.
And then they actually get into romantic relationships with those type of people because they have been taught that that behavior is just normal.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. I mean, just think about Beauty and the Beast and how revolting. What's his name?
Yeah.
The guy, I can't remember him, the
I
dark-haired guy.
forget his name.
Me too. But
Oh,
anyway, he's just like a
Gaston?
Gaston. Is it Gaston? Yeah, he's just the prototypical studly, masculine. I'll have any woman I want. And why doesn't she want me? She's reading a book. Like, what?
Mhm.
You know,
It's
and
true.
you're supposed to be like, yeah, so excited about that. Wow. Yeah, it's powerful. And so, one of the things in the movie, and I've been interviewing other people because I'm putting together a course about exiting these relationships, which can be
Great.
really super tricky, especially with children, a little less so when you don't have, you know, all the entanglements of marriage, a house, whatever. Like if you're just dating, but it's still hard because then you're sort of like a little satellite floating alone and vulnerable. You don't have that anchor or the why to kind of keep them away, and you're more likely to get pulled back. And the average woman, they say, goes back like 8 times.
I
So
know,
tell
isn't
me
that
about
crazy?
you and your situation. Did you go back?
Yeah, I did. My situation was so unique, and yet it still happened. So I matched with this person on a dating app, and it was the first time that I'd ever used dating apps because I had recently exited a 9-year relationship and a 4-year marriage. So
Wow.
it was my first time ever using dating apps. I think I just turned 30. I'm 32 now. And this person I matched with, we matched and we had plans to get coffee. And I wish I would have just met them for coffee, but I wasn't ready. And so I just made up some excuse and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm actually on my way. I'm moving to France. I'm about to go start a new life. And he was like, oh, well, I'm going to France over the holidays. Like maybe we can link up then. And I was like, okay. And so we kept talking, and in my circumstance, I had recently just left a community that I had called home for 12 years. I was in a new country. And while I speak the language, like I was isolated from all my friends. And so you can imagine for a narcissist slash sociopath to come into my life, it was like the perfect storm because that love bombing,
Yep.
when I was feeling my grief, when I was feeling alone, when I was feeling, pulled outside of myself, they were there. And so the love bombing phase, I would say, lasted for about 6 weeks before we met. And the moment we met, I knew. I had been catfished. Like I was just like, oh no, he doesn't look like his photos. He has a completely different energy. I was not attracted. But because so much had gone into the relationship until we met, like, we're going to hike the Andes when you graduate from this program. We're going to do this. You're going to come move with me here. I was already in such chaos in my mind. And I think it just silenced me. And so I stayed. And so we continued to date. And about 2 months later, he said some things that didn't make sense. So I had been talking with my best friend the whole time that I was starting to date this person. And she was like, let me just see if I can like find anything online about him.
Yeah.
And so she pulled, up until that point, we didn't have all of his info. And after about 2 months, like I knew his name or what I thought was his name. I knew some other details. And she just went online and pulled a public records report. And as you saw in the film, pretty much everything that I had been told was a lie. And
Mhm.
yet I stayed.
Oh my gosh. That's
I mean, I broke up with him soon after that because it was overwhelming. But 2 months later, we started talking again, and I did go back. And I had so much shame at first to admit that to people that I had gone back. But as I've been healing and learning that your brain is quite literally withdrawing from a drug, and just like as if you were addicted to a substance, you need support, you need a community, you need a group. I didn't have that. I didn't even know what had happened to me. I didn't know what this was called. So it took until experiencing then more severe parts of the abuse to really know that something was off and to get out.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean, if all you had to say was, I'm moving to France, like there you go. There's the target. You're a mark right there. Just that vulnerability. I mean, if you were even in a like a program where there were going to be a lot of other people around you, maybe or something would be different. But were you in anything like that? Were you just yourself, just going over there to do your thing?
I was part of a residency program with other artists in a school. However, I was the only American, and I didn't really know anyone. I had some contacts there because I had done a short stint of this residency 3 years prior, but no, I was completely out of my element
Oh
for
my,
sure. I was living alone for the first time ever in my whole life. Yeah. It was the
after
perfect storm.
9 years with the same person and then a 4-year marriage and then jaunting off and starting fresh with your new life after divorce. Oh my God. Well, that's exactly what happened to me. It's like starting fresh and I'm going to do my thing. And then,
Right?
and so I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I think that's kind of when you're most vulnerable because you're kind of open to things too. Cause you're like, I'm going to do things different now. I'm going to, like you said, it's like it's like an identity thing. You were trying to find yourself and find your voice and find who you were on your own as a person. And yet this other person came in and swooped in with such intensity, right? Like,
It's so crazy. And looking back on it now, like as I've learned from, I've been one of the people in the film and who has become a good friend, therapist Shannon Thomas. She works with a lot of people who are recovering from these types of relationships, whether it be with a parent or even in a church community or with a lover. But one of the things now that she said is like, there's usually this sort of inception sob story that
mhm.
they get you with, like they can sniff you out completely. And so I remember it was one of our first times talking on the phone, and there was this whole sob story about growing up in this country and having to flee, and the mom being put in prison, and growing up then, as an expat in a country that they didn't know. And it was insane. And because of the intensity of that story and that trauma, when things started to not make sense, I didn't want to be a jerk and like be like, but that doesn't make sense with this story, because I didn't want to bring up that trauma again. So, but now looking back, like that was all calculated to sort of keep me silent and prey upon my empathy, which is so sadistic, but hindsight is 2020, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's interesting that you said that you had that connection. And then when you saw him for the first time, you were like, no. And yet you kind of allowed it to happen. Like that definitely happened to me like twice.
Whoa.
It's well, at least once for sure. That one thing came to mind where I was like, man, this is a hard no. And then because of the way this person was, and again, he used my vulnerability and kind of he morphed into a better version of what I would want, right? Because all of the characteristics were, he was very attractive, but it just like the energy was wrong. I was like,
Yeah.
no, I don't like this person. And then he shifted and morphed into this different, more quiet version, which is more,
Mm-hmm.
well, it was fascinating, like in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
um,
They 100%
yeah.
mirror you. And take on values that you have that they don't. And I remember when that veil was lifted, I thought equally to me, he was passionate about human rights and, you know, caring for impoverished children and just all the things I had worked towards in my life. Like I thought he was also passionate about, and that really preyed at me. I was like, oh my gosh, this man who cares about the world the way that I do. And then I remember, you know, 6 months or 8 months later, seeing that all more or less disappear, the way he talked about women, the way he talked about gay people, queer people, him knowing so much my passion and care for the LGBTQ community, and just all of that being thrown out the window. And I was like, who is this person? But they basically take a mirror of you, so that it's like you're falling in love with yourself, basically.
Mm. But it's funny. So that piece with that, with him knowing that community and where your heart is at, do you, to me, that's almost like a boundary crossing. Like, is she gonna see this and call me on it, or can I get away with it? And they love it when they can trample on what you care most about, and you still don't do anything, because it shows that they've won you over and you're weak and they're strong, and you're gonna love them no matter what, kind of. And so if they can, like, they just keep doing that. It's like, where can I move the boundary? How can I cross into this territory? And that's like one of the best examples of a real red flag, right? Because you tell them this is what matters, and then they deliberately do something that's in direct contradiction to either what they've promised or said they believe in, or just they just do it. Like, I've set hard boundaries, and then they're just like, oh no, instead of that, I'm gonna come and visit you instead of meeting you halfway. And it's like, what? And that's supposed to be romantic. It's like, no, I said no.
Yeah.
And that happened to me many times. And in hindsight, I was like, oh yeah, that was a major boundary cross. That wasn't romantic. That wasn't.
Yeah. In my case, I remember early on, he had said a couple of things about, you know, about being gay, and I was offended by them and I called him out on it. But early on, when he was still trying to love bomb me and get me, he apologized.
Right.
Later on, after we had gone through, so the idealized cycle, and then we had gone through the devalued discard cycle a couple times, and I had been trained to be silent or I would lose love.
Right.
Later on, he would make those comments about women or about, you know, the LGBTQ community or about myself. And he would say really rude, horrible things to me. And because I was afraid of losing the love, losing the relationship, I just stayed silent.
Mm.
Um, and I got really sick as a result, you know, so anxious, lost so much weight, was just in a psychological sort of hell until I could pull myself out.
Wow. So were people around you worried about you? I mean, I know you're far away from everyone, but were they seeing you like on video and commenting?
Yeah, and you saw this in the film. I mean, that relationship really further isolated me from my community. I'm part of a huge, robust, beautiful artist community in Brooklyn. Like I feel like got really distant from a lot of my friends. And then my best friend, Lindsay, who we've gone through so much together, it almost broke us. And I would say that she is the reason why I got out, because in talking about trying to exit these types of relationships, right, I've also been thinking about, okay, what do people need when they are stuck in that hell? Because it's so hard to explain to someone who hasn't gone through it, but it truly is, as you know, so difficult to exit. And people really need a non-judgmental buoy that will always be there, that is someone to confide in. When you come up for air and you see the truth, you need that person that's like, okay, he said this, I'm going to remind you that he said that, or she said this, or they said this. Like, let's remind each other that this happened, so that when you go back under, we can pull you back out a little bit. And, you know, I feel like Lindsay did that for me, but it weared on us. And she was sort of getting to the end of her
Yeah.
ability to have me lean on her, because it was starting to hurt her as well, to see me just go through these cycles back and forth.
Oh man. Yeah, and those are great metaphors because it's literally like you're she's swimming out to save you or throwing you the rope and you're pulling her back in because the pull is so strong, and you can only go through that so many times and not just be like, screw it, like
Mhm.
this isn't working. How many times do I have to go through this, right?
Mhm.
But I agree. I mean, I made a video. It's not on YouTube yet, but I made it a while back, and it's just about one person believing. Because what happens is when you're with these people, narcissists are so charismatic and so outwardly directed and so concerned with their reputation. They're always the pillar of the community, the best neighbor, the life of the party, the like kind person. And then behind closed doors, it can be very, very different. So convincing people that this is even happening can be a huge challenge. But if you have one person who believes you, can make a huge difference, both helping you get out, but then also when you're on the other side, because that person's like reminding you
Mhm.
to go back, right? Kind of like what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's so true. And I recently was that buoy for another friend who confided in me, and it was so hard. It was so hard because, she said she was going no contact and then went back, and said she was going no contact and then went back. But I was just like, there is no judgment here. Like, I know how hard that is, and I'm going to be here no matter what. Even if you go back 7 times, like, I'm going to be here. You need a safe person to confide in and to know how it feels when your nervous system is settled, talking to a safe person versus talking to someone who is going to pull you out of your center. And but it is painful work for the person that is trying to help that person exit the toxic abusive relationship, for sure.
Right. I like to say that person, just being the believer and the witness, is super helpful because it's validating, right?
Mhm.
Obviously not that person's job to rescue you. It's your job to kind of figure that out. But if they can be there and remember that that's not their job, but
Mhm.
they can still witness and validate and still take care of themselves, right? They
Yeah.
probably need some therapeutic help as well, because as
Yeah.
you said, it's a lot. And then if they're the only one who believes and no one else believes, it's even harder.
Yeah. It's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true. I'm grateful in my circumstance, my person. I mean, and I feel conflicted in diagnosing anyone because I never went with him to a therapist.
Right.
I'm just sort of making calculated assumptions based on these traits, right? But he had confided in an ex-girlfriend that he had been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. And we know that people with antisocial personality disorder are technically sociopaths. So my person, um, it was maybe in some ways easier because they said they had friends, but I never saw any of the friends.
Mm.
They were very private, very isolated. They would never meet any of my friends. So in some ways, it made it a little easier for me. While the abuse was still bad, I didn't have to be out in public with this person and see how they were so, valorized by all these other people, and then in silence suffer and be like, but they're not like that, because I only saw him in private.
Right.
So that was also fascinating.
That is interesting. Yeah. So you never saw, you were in public together.
We
You
were in
saw each
public
other, but not.
together. Yeah, and he was really kind to wait staff, to people, like, had good social skills. And his family, we hung out with his family a bunch, and they're amazing, but never met any friends, and he would never meet any of my friends, which was funny.
Wow.
Mhm.
How did his family react to you? Like,
Yeah, you know it's so conflicting, right? Because
mm,
my intention with this whole project has never been, I wish him well. Like, I truly wish him well.
right.
I hope he finds peace. I hope he heals. I know that there's been a lot of trauma in his past. Um, my intention with this project has just been using my experience to be able to talk about this on a larger level, because I know that in society it is so ubiquitous. But the family, at least the family members that I dialogued with and have a relationship with, they were the ones that actually told me to get out. Like they didn't have the same language as I do now, based being in this world, right? We have these terms like love bombing, flying monkeys. Like they didn't have those terms. Like when you've gone through this, you start to really try to figure out like what the heck happened to me. But they used the word, oh, he's a psychopath, you know? Like, oh, he's exhibited this pattern with other women before. Oh, you don't deserve to be treated like that. Oh, you know, he's crazy. You should get out. And so I just find that fascinating too. Like, even if a family doesn't have the language that we have in this survivor space, they know something is off as well.
Right. Because you're so genuine and caring or whatever. But was he lying about his name too? Like, how did that work out when his family was around? Was there
I mean,
like you're calling him one thing and they're like, wait, what? Who is he? Oh, that's
I mean, so awkward, right? Just like a whole world of awkwardness. Like they were like, yeah, we were wondering why you would always like say weird things and that we're not right about this story or about where he's from. And they were like, we were just always wondering, like, wow, why is Katrina saying this weird stuff?
oh my gosh.
Which kills me. That kills me. I'm just like, wow.
Correct you either, or say, well, wait, what do you mean? But if your brother or whatever is a psychopath, you probably learn just to not get too involved, because Lord knows what his retribution looks like, or you know what he could do. They probably just walk away and like don't get involved. Right.
Well, that's the thing, right? Explosive people who have a history of lashing out train everybody else around them to just shut up.
Exactly.
And so he got away. All I had to do around his family, all I had to do was ask anyone how old he was in front of him. That's all I had to do. But I didn't, because I was already afraid of him and they were too.
Oh, okay.
And so that is the saddest thing to me. When you are around someone who is has this chaotic energy that you don't trust, you just try to be silent so that you keep the peace, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just easier to not stir the pot.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I'm so glad that you're sharing this though, and at this level of detail, because I think that we as women especially can drown our intuition and that voice, that tap on the shoulder. And if you've seen an interview like this and you're like starting to think, well, why do I want to ask his sister if his real name is John, you know, or how old he really is? Like, there's something off here. You should not be feeling that way, right? And then to fear asking a basic question like that says a lot about the relationship that you're in.
Yeah.
Dynamic.
Yeah. What I want to tell people, I mean, anyone getting into a relationship with anyone, the first moment that they say they're going to do something and they don't, ask. The first moment some detail doesn't line up, ask. The first time they let you down, share how you're feeling. You know, likely that is a pattern that is like sort of the tip of the iceberg to a much larger issue. And I think as women specifically, we've been socialized to be quiet, to be silent, to take what we can get. And it gets us into so much trouble and pain, just real pain. We don't need that.
Right. And just suppressing your sorrow, you're bummed out, let down. Like, you're supposed to just take it on the chin and act like, nope, it's okay, whatever, nope, I'm good. That whole thing. And it just snowballs, and you end up accepting so much hurtful crap. That's just so much BS.
Like, I would rather be alone at this point in my life, having been in long relationships. I would rather be alone and free than in a relationship in which I had to hide and, you know, suppress my essence, my energy. And that's what happened in this relationship. Like, the person that he had told me was so amazing, so beautiful, he also so carefully, systematically was like dismantling. And by the time I got out of that relationship, I think my biggest regret is that I just lost a year of my life.
Mm,
Coming out of my marriage, like having so many bold plans and so much excitement for this like newfound empowerment. And,
mhm.
it just, I got side swiped again. And now is the first time where I really feel like I'm taking those calculated steps to be the woman that I've known myself to be, but I'm 32, and that doesn't mean anything. Some people make their greatest work when they're 60. Like, I'm
Right.
grateful to be 32. I'm grateful to be in this body. I'm grateful to have this awareness. But it is just sad to me. And so I would say to anyone who sees that they're in this sliver, like, oh my gosh, you have so much more to gain if you can just get out. Like, it's going to be hard, but you have the world to gain from getting out from under an oppressive relationship.
Yeah. Amen. Oh, I'm 7 years out and I looked at this journal this is going back 15 years. And what's beautiful, and this is why I love journals, is I have exactly everything I really wanted. Like in the middle of how horrible it was, I was writing and seeing everything pretty clearly. And I went through my own kind of spiritual evolution as a seeker and trying to ground myself and, fix me and separate from his stuff. He had so many things going on. But what's cool is, like, as much as it sucks reading all of the stuff that I went through and how petty some of it was and emotional, um, I found a page that was about what I really wanted. And it's like, you know what? I'm good. I don't have a guy. I'm okay, because what you just said is true. It's like I have so much freedom and I
Mhm.
see my friends in relationships, so even the good ones, you're still running a lot of things by the other person. So if you're in the middle of evolving and becoming someone, or you're on a mission, it's great to have support, or to just be your own support, right? And find a family or a community around you that's positive and empowering. And that's so much more valuable. And
Mhm.
it's a much deeper and more rich connection than any romantic relationship. It really is.
It's so true. I mean, all I know is that we enter this world alone and we exit this world alone. But yet, as women, we've been taught that we are incomplete unless we have another person, which is in total contradiction to the first thing that I just said. And
Right.
so, if we can just learn to see that story as complete BS and really find our autonomy and our center, then lovers can come into our lives, relationships can come into our lives, family, children, but we will always be rooted and we will always be grounded and we will always be complete without needing someone else to complete us. And I think that when someone beautiful comes into our life that's healthy, that magnifies us, yes, that's great. But I think we're at real risk when we've been taught that we're incomplete within ourselves for someone like a narcissist to come in, for someone like a sociopath to come in, because we're just waiting for anyone to complete us. But
Right.
not everyone is worthy of being let in. In fact, a lot of people can do a lot more damage than they can
Right.
good for your health and for your well-being.
For sure. Yeah. And having those, and that might sound like a wish to somebody who's listening or watching this, right? Like, oh, well, I'd love to, especially with the whole code. I just did an earlier interview talking about the narcissist codependent or narcissist empath thing, which is a thing, because they sort of complement each other. So if you are a hardcore empath or codependent person and you haven't worked on yourself yet, go start looking that stuff up and really start thinking about where that comes from. And a lot of it's rooted in our childhood and how we were raised, and the early years under age 7, and our parents and all that stuff. And it's not to blame them, it's just to examine it
Mm-hmm.
and figure out what is it that we're searching for with these connections, right?
100%.
Because it
I've
seems
been, oh, sorry, go ahead.
it seems like unconditional love in the beginning,
Yeah.
but it becomes so conditional, like quickly, right? Like these people are like, oh, you're the best. And one of the weird things is, because I've had multiple of these types in my life, one of the repeating pattern is we have so much in common when we really don't. I'm like, really? Like what? And it's like, well, we like each other, or whatever, these random things. And then we're so similar. It's all I see are differences, right? Or
Yeah.
we, and then telling you they love you way too soon, and they're waiting for you to say it back, almost like this pressure. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you're not really feeling it. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you just go, "Oh, I guess I'll say it," just
Mm-hmm.
because it's so intense. And I remember holding out and not saying it, and how great that felt, because I was honoring myself. But I think when they swoop in and you've never been through it before, you're like, oh my God, he's just only known me for 2 weeks and he already loves me and he wants to marry me or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And because we've been taught, like, look at all the movies we've watched growing up. We've been taught that's what it looks like. It's complete irrationality to me at this point, but that's what we've been taught love looks like. So when it comes in, even if you're at war with yourself and you're like, oh, this doesn't feel good, you feel bad. You feel like you should say it back. And that just opens a whole box of trouble.
Right. Because you're if you don't say it back, you're hurting your feelings. I mean, this is love, really. You're gonna say you love someone to not hurt their feelings, and somebody you've only known for 2 weeks or whatever. Like, it's so ridiculous when you think about it. Right? In hindsight, but you're in it, it's I don't know, it's just so, it can be incredibly manipulative.
Yeah. It's funny. I recently started dating again after taking a substantial time away, and someone has come into my life who's just so sweet, so kind, so complimentary, but I'm watching, and I'm wary, and it's sad to me because it had to take someone abusing my ability to have an open heart, abusing my ability to love for me to be grounded and guarded. But I expressed that to this person. I was like, hey, because of this trauma, like, I need to go really slow. My heart is so closed off. And their response to that is what told me everything. They were like, of course. And if this doesn't become anything, I'm okay with that. And I was like, okay, that to me feels safe now.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
Mhm.
no pressure. Like, that's really good. Yeah. That's such a healthy sign.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the fact that you've attracted somebody that into your life shows all the work that you've done with
Mhm.
yourself too.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, as a filmmaker, if you could make new Disney movies, what would that look like? I know you're a documentary filmmaker, but
Well, it's funny you say that because I am a documentary filmmaker, but I'm currently writing with Lindsay from the film My Best Friend. We're trying
yeah.
to write a 2-season pilot about our lives as women. And as a filmmaker, so I fell in love. It's funny, as I was dating the sociopath, I was reading Women Who Run with Wolves,
Mhm.
which is, as you know, this beautiful
It's
work of art of all of these female mythologies that have been lost. It was crazy because as I was dating the sociopath, I was seeing myself as the protagonist of these women and all these folklores.
Mhm.
And so I think if I were to, as a filmmaker today, make things, I would tell these alternative stories
Mhm.
of the other, stories that are not within the patriarchal framework. So we could have different examples of what it means to be a woman, different examples of what it means to be a man, different examples of what it means to be intersex, non-binary, because we don't have those. And I think it causes so much harm and so much damage, right, in so many ways. But I think, primarily speaking to women in the situation that I'm coming out of, if we were to have better role models, that your whole life is not just to find your man and to have your family,
Yeah.
what would that do? What would that do for us when we get into these situations? We'd be able to see the writing on the wall so much sooner.
Yeah. It's not everything. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. Yeah. So you're in the film, you have other people you've connected with, which is really cool. And their stories are kind of woven through as well. And I'm thinking of Kevin. I think that's his name.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. So he had an older woman who's a narcissist in his life, right? So how did you meet him?
Yeah. So it was such an interesting, I really feel like I've healed so much because I made the film. Like
Yeah.
film is life, life is the film, all mixing
Yeah.
together. But when I got out of this and went no contact, I didn't know what had happened. Some other women started telling me, like, I think you were dating a narcissist, or like, have you looked up this person's work? And I started following these narcissism accounts on Instagram, and I was like, holy cow, like, whoa, that resonates, that resonates, that resonates. And through following some of these accounts, I connected with Kevin. And then I had seen an Instagram live he had did speaking out against his abuser. And I just fell in love with his personality, his charisma. And I was like, hey, would you be down for an interview for this film? Not realizing that he was still very much like in his situation. And so within the film, as you know, he goes through a huge transformation, like finally being able to close that chapter of his life. And we've been walking together as friends through our healing and recovery. And it's been so beautiful to have a partner to do that with, a friend who gets it, who's in the thick of it with you, who's retracing all the memories, who's trying to figure out what is fact, what is fiction. So yeah, it was a really special relationship that started because of the film, and now it's just a friendship outside of, outside of it.
Right. Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's a beautiful relationship. And one of the other things that I wrote down when I was watching it, I started thinking about the target piece. And like when I started this podcast, it was the idea was 2014. I launched in 2015. There really weren't many. There were others, but not as, I mean, now there's like tons and tons of accounts and podcasts. There was not a lot of validation out there. And I started consuming a lot of books, videos, anything I could find. And I think it was very negative and very much vilifying the narcissist. There wasn't much empathy there or true understanding. And it was all about like going no contact, but also living in fear, which I think gives them a lot of power instead of healing. Now I feel like things are more toward healing. I mean, you'll find a mix of everything out there, but I started thinking about true narcissists and sociopaths looking for targets online, looking through those hashtags. And I wonder, not that I'm trying to give them any ideas, but I wonder if that's a thing too. Because I know I see patterns of men who reach out to me through Instagram, usually just delete them immediately. But it does seem like a certain type. And I always think, where did they find me? Was it this hashtag? Was it like, and there's a part of me that feels like people know that if you've been with a narcissist, you might be an easier mark. And I'm just saying this for my listeners to like, just be aware of that. Like, I've talked to other people who've had, I mean, I honestly don't like anybody who reaches out to me, any males who reach out to me through social media anyway. I feel like I just never take it seriously unless it's a business thing. I just don't. Because I feel like it's not a dating app, it's Instagram or whatever, like, but I think it's something to be aware of because you have a history, you're sharing your story, and you are vulnerable in some way, even though you're more aware and you're like, oh, that's never going to happen to me again. I sort of feel like they know. And it's just, this is just me waving another flag, like, FYI, take it with a grain of salt.
Such a beautiful thing to talk about and to, in the survivor community, to just be mindful of. I wish we could create like a hashtag just to like, don't be the target or something like that, just to sort of be mindful of this. Because that energy does, unfortunately, and that's where it's important for us to do our work too. So I have been in CODA for the last 3 months. I do have a sponsor. I just, when this happened, while I never think abuse is in no way ever any survivor's fault, I do think it was important for me to look at what are my wounds? What motivates me? Why do I get off center? And so I've been, healing the codependent wound, which is just like, I want to be loved and I want to give love. And that's who I am. I have a big heart, but I have to learn how to protect her. So with the Target thing, I mean, I can speak to one anecdote that is really kind of creepy that I don't really go into in the film because it's just kind of too convoluted to disclose. But the women who actually taught me about narcissism. So my ex was, when I realized he was at least emotionally cheating, I'm not sure physically cheating, I realized it through Instagram. So many women that he would comment on their page or repost, or, he just made it so obvious that I was like, I wonder how he knows them. Does he really know them? Are they his friends?
Right.
And after we broke up, while I was so confused and sort of coming to figure out what happened, I reached out to them. And I was like, I don't know what I just went through. Some weird stuff happened to me. I just want to warn you about this person. And they were like, thank you so much for reaching out. He's been bothering me too. Thank you for giving me the audacity to block him. And they were like, I'm healing from a relationship with a narcissist. Maybe that's what he is. You should look into this.
Wow.
Like 3 of them. And I was like, how did he? So now in retrospect, I'm like, how did he know that they also had been targets of this type of abuse? How did he target? It's just so I do think there is some type of characteristic in my experience. I don't know what the therapists in this realm would say about this, but it's just too eerie to me to see those parallels and not get really curious about it.
That is such a good example of what I'm talking about, because it is, because all the stuff that people write in the comments makes them really vulnerable too. Like mainly YouTube videos is where I see the longer ones, but you're putting so much out there and then it's so easy. They'll be like, ha ha ha, oh, she's got a great picture and let's see who this is. And they're like silly putty. They're going to just like blend and pick up what they need and morph and manipulate. Wow.
It is wild to me, the amount of people who, in just sharing my story though, the amount of friends, colleagues that have come forward and been like, I think I'm in that, or I just exited that, or my boss is that. And, I think it's safe to assume, especially in our culture, like we will run into these personalities again. And that's why it's really important to know the language, identify the signs, and to have a plan because I might not ever get into a situation like that again romantically, because I can see it, but like I might not have the control of not having to work for someone like that, or so.
Especially in the industry you're in. I think it's pretty rare.
Unfortunately.
I know. I went to film school, and honestly, that was why I never went to LA. I was like, I just was so sensitive to other people's energy, and I just knew that I wouldn't be able to hack it.
Yeah. That's why I'm all for, even as survivors, we have our own healing to do too. And if we can truly face that fear, face that trauma, care for ourselves, we will be fortified and be able to deal with these energies. Because that's what I see it as. It's energies, and we have to be grounded and healthy enough within ourselves to be able to confront those energies.
Right. And you created a community. I would love to hear about your community. I want to in your community.
It's still growing. So I'm partnering with Narcinon. I don't know if you've seen their content online.
I probably have.
But we're about to create a mighty network that I'll run the peer support groups through. And the peer support groups are really geared towards that. I want people to be able to find each other, be able to discuss what happened to them, be able to build relationships, but also within that same framework, not to just dwell on the wound, not to just navel gaze. Like I want us to move that trauma through our bodies and be able to heal. So no peer support session that I host will ever not do that. Like we will talk, we will meet, we will share stories, but then we will also go into meditation, go into breath work, go into some simple practices that can soothe our nervous system, journaling exercises, because I think in discussing this type of stuff, it's sort of unresponsible to sort of just leave it hanging in the ethers. It needs to be then sort of pushed through the body and transformed.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. That's perfect. I mean, I've grappled even with a Facebook group because I'm like, I can't, I also have 2 children who are going through stuff, and I'm like, okay, no negativity, go to a different group for that. This is where we're talking about healing and positivity, but it's really hard to do that. So I love that you have the professional expert piece, and then that goal of knowing that it's not just a dumping ground, it's a healing ground where you're going to come together and transmute the negative into the positive and heal. It's awesome.
Yeah. So we took a break off for July, and in August we're starting to gather that, and then we'll be publicizing that just on their Instagram page and mine for how to join.
Okay. So it's Narcanon, is it?
Yeah. Narcinon, Narcinon.
Narcanon. Okay. Check them out. So where else can we hear about your film? What's the best
way? So we created a website, my team and I. It's tidaldocumentary.com, TIDAL, like a tidal wave. I called it that because this relationship to me felt like, from everything, right? From inception, the love bombing phase felt like a tidal wave that just kind of hit me. But then the metaphor of the ocean, like being in one of these relationships, I felt like I was constantly being dragged out to sea to where I couldn't swim. And then I would come up for air and like safely make it back to the shore, only to be like pulled out further. So that was my intention in naming it that. But tidaldocumentary.com, you can join the mailing list to be updated on both community stuff and film stuff. And then just my personal Instagram page is where I'm hosting info right now and partnering with Narcanon. Yeah.
Awesome. Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this interview. I'm so excited.
Thank you.
And can't wait for your film to come out and just see, I think it feels like a movement.
Yeah.
And I just assume whatever else you do will be informed by this amazing learning experiment.
Absolutely.
Experience.
It was trial by fire. I barely made it out, but I'm happy to be where I'm sitting right now with the awareness that I have and trying to help other people.
Yeah. Well, I hope that your 2-season pilot.
Yes.
I hope that is that going to cover this.
Thank you. This will be a part of it for sure. My character, that's a big part of her story. So for sure.
So many people will be able to relate to that. So that's going to be amazing. Yeah. I will keep my fingers and toes crossed.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this.
You're very welcome. Well, I will put all of this stuff in the show notes, and I will let you know when
cool.
it comes up.
You're amazing. Thank you. It was so great to finally connect with you.